In the 21st century, those who change the world are those who change the culture. They get people in sync, lead tribes, create movements, and generate an energy field where ordinary people achieve extraordinary results.
I look at the quote from Nelson Mandela from South Africa, who said, "It seems impossible until it's done." And the best leaders, the culture that's really effective, is a culture that's not trying to manage mindset or turn pessimists into optimists or the other way around. It's a culture of action that says, regardless of your psychology or your mood or your attitude, what are the actions that are going to create the change that's going to create progress?
I'm Aga Bajer, and this is the Culture Lab podcast, where you will find ideas and inspiration on how to harness the power of team and organizational culture. I talk to leadership thinkers, culture experts, entrepreneurs, and all sorts of movers and shakers, and together we explore the fascinating topic of culture, leadership, and personal growth. If you like what you hear, subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Or better yet, write a review on iTunes and share the podcast with your followers and friends on social media. For more, check out our archive at www.agabajer.com/podcast. Hi, and welcome to episode 48. It's really hard for me to believe that October is almost over. I've recently been to Switzerland to speak at a really cool conference called Ignite at the University of St. Gallen, and riding on the train to get there was literally like being in a fairy tale. The autumn colors, just spectacular. And if you are in Europe, based in Europe, or willing to travel to Europe and still don't know about this conference, definitely check it out. The website is ignite-movement.com, and it's organized by incredibly passionate students. And the whole experience this year has been really uplifting and inspiring for me. So definitely follow them and consider joining the conference next year. But enough of that, and let me now introduce our guest today. Chris Westfall is the author of Leadership Language and a consultant to financial leaders and Fortune 100 companies. He helped entrepreneurs to launch a broad array of businesses and successfully rebranded products and services around the globe. Working with thousands of business leaders, he's helped launch over 50 companies while raising over 100 million in investment capital. The reason I wanted to talk to Chris is because I noticed that when leaders want the culture to change or to be a certain way, they often try to convince their teams to adapt the new way of being and of behaving. And as a result, their communication style resembles a pitch rather than a conversation or a dialogue. And Chris says that it's time to stop pitching and start connecting. Find out how to do that. Here is Chris Westfall. So Chris, welcome to the Culture Lab.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Same here. I'm so excited that you accepted our invitation and can't wait to talk about what I know we will be talking about today. Our listeners don't know that yet. But before we go there, can I ask you to briefly introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure. Well, you know how when somebody says, tell me a little bit about yourself or tell me what do you do, the way that you answer that question is called an elevator pitch or an elevator speech, right? It's a short introduction to a person or even a product or an idea. Well, a few years back, I was recognized as the U.S. National Elevator Pitch Champion. And since receiving this recognition, I've gone on to publish 7 books. My 8th is called Leadership Language. It just came out last year. And
congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much. but the recognition as the national elevator pitch champion propelled my career in some unexpected directions and helped me to work with Fortune 100 companies, executive leaders, helping people with culture, marketing, branding, team building, employee engagement, and so many other things, all based on this idea of effective communication. And as I looked at what makes an effective pitch, I realized that the best pitch isn't a pitch at all. It's a conversation.
Mm.
And
I'm
the
so
thing that
relieved because I'm not a big fan of elevator pitches. I have to be
ooh,
honest. So
well,
it's
here's
so good to hear that you don't have that very traditional approach to the elevator pitch.
well, I hope not. And if it sounds like I'm pitching something, just stop me because here's the thing. The, there's no reason to pitch if you understand how to have a conversation. And that's that was really the theme of the first book that I wrote, The New Elevator Pitch, was that the new elevator pitch, it's not a pitch. It's not a memorized speech. It's a dialogue. And anybody who thinks that they're going to speechify someone to create real results, you're making a mistake. So if it sounds like I'm pitching something, you just stop me because that is not my intention. I'm here to have a conversation. And I think that's what everybody's here to have is a conversation, a dialogue where they can learn things and see things in a new way. At least that's my hope. So
This
so
is
that's a little
definitely
bit
our
about
intention for sure. We
cool.
want to have a conversation and have it in a very natural and informal way. We both have our coffees here, and basically it's just like having a coffee with a friend and chatting about stuff that we are both interested in.
Right. Absolutely. Like culture and how to lead through change and that sort
Yeah,
of thing. So
yeah.
I was just going to say, but to tell you a little bit more about myself, I'm originally from Chicago. I worked in a corporate environment for many, many years, worked in corporate culture as an executive at Fortune 100 companies. So, from that perspective, both working inside a corporate culture and working as an entrepreneur, it's provided me with some insights that I share that relate to the topic of transformation, whether that's transforming the conversation, transforming the way that people think about pitching, the way that they think about leadership, the way they think about culture, to introduce new ideas. And hopefully today we'll talk about some of those new ideas. So
Yeah,
that's a little about
wonderful.
me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's really helpful. And to frame this conversation even further for our listeners,
Mm.
if you're still wondering, what does this all have to do with team or company culture? I want to give a little bit of context around why I wanted you to be our guest, Chris.
Mm.
So there's one question that I always ask when I interview senior leadership teams, because it kind of helps me identify their biggest cultural frustrations. And the question is this: what's one sentence that your colleagues tend to use a lot and that drives you nuts? So, can you guess the most frequent answer, Chris?
I would guess that's the way we've always done things.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. So it's some version of this will never work here, or this is how we've
Mm.
always done this here. And the funny thing is that most leaders I work with have an inspiring vision and they have a good plan to get where they want to get. And their vision and their plans, unfortunately, very often don't land very well with their teams. And so they'll tell me, my people are resistant to change. And so I'm curious about your take on this. Why are people resistant to change, and how the work that you are doing can help leaders to find an effective way to communicate their message and engage their people?
It's easy to get lost focusing on the details of change and what change really means. But the question that I ask is, where does resistance really come from? Because we all know that people fear change, they resist change. It's a natural occurrence, but at the same time, it's also true that people are always interested in progress. So, is change something to be feared or something to be embraced? Of course, we know how leaders would like the team to see it. But my coaching and my work with teams focuses on the real source of that resistance, because it's not the details of the change that are so troubling. It's the way that it's the way that teams think about those details, the way that those details are processed. And instead of seeing change as progress, it's viewed from a pessimistic lens, right? We know how this is going to go. It's not going to go well. We can't do this. As you like you were saying, it looks like it's impossible. But of course, I look at the quote from Nelson Mandela from South Africa, who said, "It seems impossible until it's done." And the best leaders, the culture that's really effective, is a culture that's not trying to manage mindset or turn pessimists into optimists or the other way around. It's it's a culture of action that says, regardless of your psychology or your mood or your attitude, what are the actions that are going to create the change that's going to create progress? And helping people to focus on that progress, and helping them to understand the mindset and the thinking that's limiting the culture. That's really the emphasis of my work.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of quotes, I think another one that is related to what you have just said is one that I really loved in your book from Bono, the lead singer of U2. And the quote says, "The world is more malleable than you think, and it's waiting for you to hammer it into shape." And so I wonder if Bono is right. Why do so many people struggle so much with hammering the world into shape? And what have you learned through the work that you do with your clients that would help them be more effective?
I think a lot of people don't believe Bono. They
Yeah, to
don't.
start with, I agree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they don't believe that the world is malleable. But let's just look at that for a second, and just for everybody listening to the sound of my voice, ask yourself this question: have you ever encountered a situation or a circumstance or a person that you thought, this is impossible, this will never work out, I can't shape this situation, I can't influence this situation, and lo and behold, things changed in spite of the way that you thought about it, in spite of the way that you saw it? We all have those stories. We all have those events in our lives where we say, this will never work out, and the way that we see it and the way that it is are two very, very different things. And the first step to changing from impossible to possible is really understanding the way that things work. And from a place of understanding, which is, I think, what Bono's trying to tell us, that the world is more malleable than we think. If we entertain that idea and explore that idea, that our thinking that this is impossible isn't leading us to results, then the question becomes, well, what might be the thinking that's most useful? What is it that's going to create those results? That's where we have to look. How can we change? Because we all have stories of literally changing our worlds.
So you've mentioned the first most important thing we need to do is to understand how things work.
Mm.
So what would be the first steps to have a real deep understanding of how things work that will then enable us to hammer the world into shape, as he says?
Right. I try to point my clients towards where our experience is coming from. And in other words, when I say our experience, I'm not talking about where you went to school or what you did last year. I'm talking about the experience that you're having right now as being presented with change or challenges or whatever it is that you're coming up against in the workplace and in the culture. So from that place of where is your experience coming from, what shows up for me is that so many of my clients go, well, it's circumstances, it's situations, it's this new leadership initiative, it's Jessica in accounting that's causing all of my stress, that's causing all of my challenges, that's causing all the difficulty. And I ask a simple question: what if that's not true? What if it's something else? And what shows up for me, and what I try to point to for my clients, is that we process our world, our circumstances, our situation through one filter only, and it's a filter that we all share. And we process things from the inside out, which means that our thinking colors everything around us.
And we
And
look at the world from our own perspective.
correct.
Clearly, I mean, it's natural, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. And if you think about it, I mean, if I said to you, where does the source of frustration, stress, anger, love, joy, jealousy, where does that come from? The answer is all of those things come from inside. It is the way that we think about a situation that creates our challenges or our ability to move forward in that situation. And so that's what I look at. And if people are listening and they're going, I don't know about that. I don't think so. I think my circumstances are so real that they're what's driving me. I would just ask this question: how big is a problem when you're not thinking about it?
that's such a great question. I love it. And I also love this part of your book that speaks about assumptions.
Mm,
And you have a quote there. You said, if you want to change your circumstances, you need to change your assumptions. So it's, as you say, about challenging our own thinking and basically asking ourselves, is the thing that I'm thinking about this problem, right? Is it really true? And what I also loved is there is this little very useful exercise in your book where you ask your readers to divide a page into two columns,
mm,
and you ask them to write their beliefs on the left hand side and then the truths on the right hand side. And I understand that this exercise can really help to, as you say, understand the circumstances and what assumptions you're making and which of those are truths, which not, but also finding common ground with your counterpart. So would you be able to talk to us a little bit more about that? Why is that a valuable exercise to do, and how this can take you forward in your thinking?
a truth, an example of a truth would be if I put my hand on a hot stove, it will burn me, right? Because a stove is always hot. That is a truth. That's a physical reality. But things that we believe, an example of something I believe is that e- every time I talk to Jessica, she never listens to me and it drives me crazy. Well, the, the question behind that belief is that true? Is that always absolutely true? Because regardless of my mood or my personality type, when I put my hand on a stove, it burns me, you know? So that is a truth. But there are times when, again, back to the mythical Jessica who drives me crazy, that Jessica doesn't drive me crazy. Actually, it's not consistent. It's not absolute. And so when we have beliefs and assumptions that look like absolutes, that to me sounds like we'll never make it. That to me sounds like change is bad. We can't do this. We can't get this done. I mean, look, the thing that shows up for me is an, a pessimist sees things only one way, right? This isn't going to go well. This isn't going to work out. And that to me is a belief that's always wrong. Because look, if I said to you, there's only one way that this situation can work out, there's only one way that we can win.
Yeah, statistically, what are the chances that you actually are right? Yeah.
Very slim.
Yeah.
There's never just one way to do anything. And no matter what our circumstances are, we always have the option to choose. We have the option to choose that our beliefs are real or to look at a deeper kind of understanding of the way that things work and understand that just because we believe something doesn't necessarily make it true.
Mm-hmm. There's this wonderful saying, don't trust your thoughts. And I made it into my mantra, especially when I feel anxious about being able to accomplish something or make it on time, or
Mm.
the possibilities of something turning out the way that would be beneficial to everyone. And then I remind myself, okay, I really shouldn't be trusting my thoughts. It's such a useful thing to think about.
I agree. I agree. I mean, the way I say it is just because a train of thought shows up doesn't mean that you have to ride that train.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's very true. And something else for me, and this is just something that I've been working on lately, is when I have these kinds of this will never work out kind of thoughts, and they show up all the time, believe me. But the one word that I use to get past that is this one: next. because I know there's
Yes.
another thought on its way, right?
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and it certainly might be more useful than the
Hmm.
thought that disaster is imminent and catastrophe is the only option, and there's only one way to win. I mean, that's just not the way that the world works. And
Mm.
focusing on taking the action that creates results is much more important and much more effective than trying to manage my psychology around it. That's why I just say next. I'm looking
Hmm.
for that thought that's going to be most useful.
Yeah. So I want us to circle back a little bit to
Mm,
this conversation about how do we challenge our assumptions. And the reason that I want us to stay with assumptions a little bit longer
mm,
um, is that this is one of the really, really important parts of culture and cultural conditioning, those common assumptions and those unwritten norms that people follow without really testing them. Do they still serve us? Is it still true? Maybe it was true in the past, and that's why we have this norm, but is it still true? And does it benefit us and our clients and other stakeholders? So I'm wondering, Chris, do you have any thoughts on how people can do it collectively when we talk about those collective assumptions and collective beliefs?
There has to be an opportunity for new beliefs to be introduced in order to change perspectives. And one of the things that I've done is to ask groups and individuals a version of this question. What if the assumptions that we have underlying this culture were, well, let's not say they're not true. Maybe that's too strong. But what if we were to start from a blank page? What if we were to design this business unit, this business model, this product launch, whatever the case may be? What if what if we were to start with a blank page? And so what I'm trying to do is to take a look at the assumptions, and I think it's a useful exercise to write them down. I think having people go through that and say, what are the assumptions that are driving our behavior? What is it that's making change look so difficult? Now, turn the page. And from a blank page, what is it that if you could start from a blank page, you could create? And people say, oh, wait a minute, I can't start from a blank page. Wait, it's just an exercise. It's just an exploration. Nobody's asking you to really start from a blank page. But when you look at business like a game or like an exercise, sometimes things can change and it can loosen up some of those perspectives that can be so limiting. And that's one of the exercises, and going a little bit deeper into that to help people to find some freedom is a
Mm.
way to introduce a new perspective rather than being locked into one that just doesn't serve you, that's based on the past, that isn't really oriented towards what it is that you'd like to create.
I love that because then you can really design the environment that would be more supportive of what you want to create and what you want to accomplish. And I think there's a great opportunity there when you work with clients. I sometimes do this exercise with clients as well. And then when you work with the leadership team, you say, okay, so if this is something that you would like to be able to create, then why don't we test it now and create this culture here, now, in the moment, in this meeting, in this workshop, and see, for example, what being honest with each other would look like,
Mm,
and being truthful and sharing even those really hard truths. And that can be quite transformational because people start realizing that the world doesn't come crashing down when they open up and speak their truth to their colleagues.
mm,
Um, where I think is where you were driving this to, because you say that it's important for our beliefs to be coming from the right, from experiences first of all, but in order to establish those beliefs, we need to create also the experiences where people can start shaping different beliefs. Would you agree with that?
100%. And it sounds like what you do is you create an environment of safety.
Yeah.
So that people, I mean, because you walk in and go, tell me your truth. And people are like, whoa, back up, hold on a second.
Yeah.
Um, and that can be a difficult question, but it can be a very powerful one if you do what you describe, which is create that atmosphere of safety, an atmosphere of new ideas, an atmosphere that says, hey, look, every book ever written always started at the same place, a blank page. the artist begins with a blank canvas. Now, within a culture, people may not self-identify as creative, but get this: we are all, every human being, built for creating things. Creativity is our nature, and that's not just me saying that because I want it to be true. That's what was shown in an IBM survey, that the number one quality that leaders look for is creativity, and not creativity like arts and crafts, but creativity, the process of creation. And if you're going to create new results, a new culture, new performance, new initiatives, a new career for yourself, all of those things by definition are creative pursuits. And it sounds like that's really what you're talking about, is you create that atmosphere of creativity.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting because when you look then at organizations that have maladaptive cultures or toxic cultures, you'll
Mhm.
see that people's creativity in those environments is suppressed. And I think that leads to tremendous disengagement and really horrible results eventually.
Right.
So it's really important to figure out, I think, how you can create that environment where people can be true to their nature, as you say, because our nature is to be creative for sure. I
Mm.
have no doubt about that. And I think if we don't find the right way to channel this creativity, then we become destructive and things don't go so well.
So true. And I think what you're pointing to is the number one challenge that businesses are facing today. And it's that they don't provide an opportunity, an environment for creativity and innovation. And I
Mm-hmm.
wrote about this in an article in Forbes, that 77% of CEOs are interested in these two top skills. 77% of CEOs are interested in innovation and creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And my question for the folks listening is your organization providing an environment for innovation and creativity? And
Mm-hmm.
companies today, they focus on training, they focus on education, they focus on learning, which is great if you want people to learn new skills and understand how to do a task. But when the task is innovation, when the task is creativity, you have to provide an environment that starts from this premise:
So let's go
innovation.
there, Chris.
Oh, yes.
What would that environment look like in your experience? Let's give our listeners some tips, because I think you're absolutely right. And the survey that you've just mentioned is 100% right. I'm sure that
Mm.
the vast majority of companies today would like their people to be creative. So I'm sure that 77% of our listeners probably would like to hear what is that environment that drives creativity and supports creativity.
Well, the first question I think you have to ask is, where does innovation really come from? And to me, here's what shows up: innovation doesn't come from what you already know. By definition, innovative ideas are new ideas, even if it's a new idea for a process you've been doing for the last 24 years. By definition, that innovation is an exercise in creativity. And so, if it's true that innovation doesn't come from what you already know, knowledge, information isn't the challenge. The challenge is to create a culture where people are safe, where people can share new ideas, where people can look at things from a blank page to create whatever it is that next level of performance and engagement. So it's not knowledge that's missing. It's the culture that can allow new ideas to come to the forefront. And that's what you see in a lot of entrepreneurial ventures, a lot of startups, a lot of companies that are changing. They're rewriting the rule book of what organizations look like. They're rewriting it because of innovation.
So what you're saying is that one of the key elements of that culture is psychological safety. Um, what other elements of a culture where innovation can really flourish would be in your view, Chris?
I think that an outside perspective is something that can be very, very valuable to help companies to innovate and create something new. I mean, the famous quote from Einstein is, "You can't solve a problem with the same
Mm-hmm.
thinking that created it." I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
And so the question for organizations is, where's that spark? Where is that external resource to help your internal resources create and innovate and see things in a new way? Because if you want new results, you have to change your behavior, you have to change your
Mm-hmm.
conversation, you have to change your communication, you have to be interested in a change that really points to progress. And
That's right.
sometimes you,
Mm.
you know what I mean, right? And you have
Yeah.
to have, I believe you have to have a change agent. I think in a chemical reaction, there's a catalyst. And in a cultural reaction, there's a catalyst too for the companies that understand how to create the performance that's missing.
Mm. And from from what I understand from what you have just said, it's important to um, really explore what change is needed by the key stakeholders that are outside of our organization as well. And I think that links into one of the exercises and practices that you share in your book, which is the empty chair
Mm,
exercise. And I loved it. It's a technique that's used in psychotherapy and coaching as well, but I don't think that a lot of our listeners are familiar with it. So would you be able to tell us a little bit about that and why it's such an important exercise to engage in?
sure. The empty chair is a metaphorical seat at the table, if you will, for someone who is not in the room, but who will be directly and dramatically impacted by any change that you propose. For example, the empty chair is a seat at the table for the patient who's going to go through the MRI machine, the scanning machine in the hospital next year. She's not in the room when the doctors and hospital administrators are making that investment decision, and yet directly and dramatically impacted. And so many times when we're making decisions, what we lose sight of is the person who sits in the empty chair, because we're worried about budgets, because we're worrying about planning, because we're worried about negotiations, because we're worried about everything except impact. And the
Mm.
empty chair points towards the impact that really matters. So, for leaders, as you're thinking about your goals, your objectives, my question is, who sits in the empty chair? Who's going to be directly and personally impacted by these objectives that you have? And remember that your team members and the people who they care about always sit in the empty chair. Does that make sense?
Well, that makes absolute sense to me. And I'm sure that it makes sense to our listeners as well. And as you were speaking, I remembered I had a client who shared with me, and I loved it. It was even before we started working together. They said that they've identified a problem. And the problem was exactly what you're saying. So they said, we realized that we were not paying enough attention to how our decisions are affecting our clients in their case. And
Mm,
so they created a totem of a client, which was a symbol, like a little statue.
mhm,
And they would tag it along with them to all of the meetings that were important meetings where they were taking important decisions to make sure that the client was always represented. And so they even
right.
had this visual, and the client was always in the room with them. And then they would ask themselves this question: what would they want in this situation? What would be important for them? Um, what aspects are critical? What are nice to haves for our clients? And very often, decisions would be completely changed based on that client perspective in the meeting.
Mm, do you find that your clients are able to listen effectively and really hear what their customers, clients, or employees have to say?
Well, I think it's still one of the biggest challenges for my clients.
Mm,
And there are many different reasons for that. But I would say for the organizations that I work with, the main problem is that a lot of decisions that impact and affect clients are taken at a level where usually senior leadership team level, where people are not necessarily exposed directly to clients,
mm,
and the information doesn't really flow really well to that level. So they take decisions based on assumptions rather
Hmm.
than truths,
Right.
as you say. So I think it is a huge challenge, and actually, it would be really interesting to talk about this and learn about your view of how organizations can improve that listening skill, especially I think when it comes to clients, because at the end of the day, it can make or break their business. And it's still not at a level I find in many organizations where it should be.
Me too. I think listening is it's 50% of every good conversation at least, but it's a lost skill. And what if there's one thing that gets in the way of listening, it's this idea that says, I know how to fix this problem. Or, let me, as soon as you get done, I've got your answer. Right. And if that's true, then by all means, there's no reason for you to listen. But if it's not, then maybe it's time to entertain another thought and to look in the direction not of your thinking and how much you know, but how you can serve your client by being there and listening. And when I say client, I mean that can mean like a traditional client, but it also means the people on your team,
Mm-hmm.
your boss is your client. I mean the people who you serve, really turning and tuning in to them in a new way by looking away from that thought that says, "Oh, I know how this is going to work out. I've got your answer." What if you don't? What if there's a new discovery to be made? What if a conversation is a journey to discover a new solution? And when organizations have those kinds of conversations repeatedly, that's how you create a culture of innovation, of discovery, and ultimately, in my opinion, success.
Yeah. And I completely resonate with that. I think for me, the majority of my work has always been at the crossroads of coaching and culture. So
Mm.
listening, I know, is a very, very powerful way of being, really. And I find that it's very, very difficult to adapt this mindset of open mindedness and of true listening, especially to leaders who grew up with this recipe of success that consists of, being the person who has all the answers, right?
Mm.
So I wonder if you have any advice for people who still feel a little bit uncomfortable to sit in this place of uncertainty and withholding judgment and opinions and solutions and just listening. Do you have any
Well,
tricks in your bag
I've got
to
to.
share with the listeners?
Let me reach into my bag. It seems to me that there's one. The first question is, how are things working for you right now? And
Hmm.
that's one question. So if you're resistant, hesitant to be in this place of real listening and real engagement, how's that working for you? And the way that you can find out is not by asking yourself, but by asking your employees and looking at your engagement scores and seeing what results you're finding from the people that matter to you. If it works, then by all means, I'm not here to argue with success. But you and I both know that there's a great need for deeper listening and greater understanding because it's from sharing ideas that we find new innovation. It's from listening to other perspectives that our own becomes clear. And maybe that's why people tune in. Maybe that's why they're listening to us, because there are always new ideas to discover. And if you deny that, it seems to me that you're denying the way that things work. It seems like you're not just disagreeing with Bono or some philosophy. You're disagreeing with the law of gravity because
Yeah.
we have to we have to engage at a deeper, more human level so that we can leverage the technology, the information and knowledge that's all around us. But the only way we do that is by really taking time to listen and getting lost in the idea that you don't need to listen because you know how this conversation is going to go. That's patently false, because despite all the things we do to try to plan and control and manage our lives and our businesses, uncertainty always exists.
Absolutely. So true.
Always.
Mm.
But here's the thing that I try to share with my clients, and maybe you do too, is look, discomfort and uncertainty don't have to go together. Just because things are uncertain doesn't mean you have to be. In fact, if you're a leader, chances are you understand that uncertainty is a given.
Yeah.
And in spite of it or because of it, you keep moving forward.
I think this is one of the marks of a really great leader who can serve their team well, that they've developed that ability to be comfortable in the uncertainty and help their teams to feel comfortable with uncertainty as well. And I think it's clearly becoming more and more important nowadays because of the exponential speed and size of changes that we're faced with. So yeah, absolutely. And you know, I wonder sometimes when you have to implement that, and I was actually in this situation just a couple of days ago. I
Mm.
was running a workshop for one of my clients, and in the brief, I was told that this is a very, very challenging team and it's not going to be easy, and blah, blah, blah. And so we co-designed this workshop with some of the workshop participants. And I stand in front of that team in the morning and just thank them for their input and for the pre-workshop interviews and surveys and so on, and say, based on what you have told us, this is the agenda that we have co-created. I'm really excited to work with you on those issues. And then a guy doesn't stand up. I wanted to say stands up, but he didn't. And he just says, do you know what? We've done workshops like these like 20 times and we've seen all of it already 1,000 times. What's going to change? And he said, we are not the problem. The management is the problem and the senior management. So go and talk to them, basically. And as you can imagine how I felt in that moment, right? And then I thought, okay, I need to drink my own medicine. So what do I do now? And so I decided I need to listen again. So we did have those pre-workshop interviews and the survey, but then it's okay, I need to listen again. So I said, okay, so talk to me about what are the burning issues for your team and what do you feel you need to tackle more effectively? And I have to tell you, I was terrified. I was terrified at the moment. So I can completely understand how our listeners who manage teams and have to go through those issues with them and just place yourself in this place of not knowing where you will go and where this conversation is going to take you, but then being willing to go on this journey with people and having an open mind and again co-create something again from scratch. It's not always comfortable. Sometimes you just have to go there anyway, though.
I can only imagine that's very scary to have. What you described, a very difficult situation, no doubt about it. Wow. I just
Yeah.
I just wonder in a situation like that, and I'm sure there are people listening that say, my team feels the same way. They say no. The problem isn't it's not us. It's the market. It's the pricing. It's the customers. It's management. It's the policies within this company. It's the culture. And
Yep.
my question is, if that's true, then I guess we should fold up our tents and go home. But is there room for another possibility? Is there room for looking at a new way of doing things? Given that this is the culture, given that this is the management, given that these are the policies, is there an opportunity to see things in a new way? I believe there always is.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you were able to dial them back and help them to see that there was a new conversation to be had. I hope so, right?
Yeah. Well, in this particular situation, on reflection, of course, you can do so many things better than you did. So I'm not saying that I handled it perfectly, but I think what worked in my approach is that I was willing in that moment to be vulnerable and to say to myself, I don't know what's going to work here, but let me listen to you guys and please tell me what those burning issues are. And then exactly what you said, we sort of went through the process of identifying what the burning issues are acknowledging and accepting the reality that they were faced with. And of course, acceptance is always hard. Some people struggle with that. But I think if you don't accept that this is what we're faced with at the moment, and as you say, if we don't want to fold our hands, then
Mm.
we will need to grapple with this reality and asking themselves what will be the things that, or what would be the things that we could do, and then what are the things that we will do to adapt to the situation in a more effective way, basically, and generate the results that we want to generate within our circle of control. And sometimes, that conversation sometimes can be challenging.
No doubt. No doubt about it.
So I want us to shift gears a little bit, but of course stay with leadership, because there is, you talk about leadership language, and you say that it's the language of connection and of authenticity. So I'd like to ask you, how do you define authenticity?
Authenticity is communicating in a way that doesn't ask people to believe in some story or a hope or a lie. Authenticity is communicating from a place of understanding of how things work. Authenticity is a place where you understand that hope is not a strategy,
Mm-hmm.
that managing psychology is never as important as the action that you take. And authenticity focuses on the action that brings your story to life so that people don't just hear about who you are, they see it. They see you live it. And I believe that the best leaders are those that lead by example. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the leader has to be able to do every task that everyone on the team can do, but the leader has to operate from a place of authenticity, from integrity, from a
Mm-hmm.
place that says, I recognize that even though I'm in charge of this team or this organization, I have an obligation to serve. And leadership is not just about authenticity, but it's also about service and serving in a way that helps people to be better, to help employees and team members and entire organizations to see possibilities, not from some made up story or some hype based hope,
Mm-hmm.
but from a place of authenticity that says, I see capabilities for you that you don't see for yourself. And if you're willing to look in this direction, there's a deeper understanding, an authentic understanding that can lead to new results and, quite frankly, can transform cultures.
Mm-hmm. And if I understand you correctly, Chris, it also means that you acknowledge and meet people where they are. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, which I think is very important, because
Mm-hmm.
the dynamic that I often witness is that, exactly like you said, that leaders go into this mode of hype and trying to sell something to people or to pitch something to people, rather than just being realistic about how things are today, and then sharing with them what they see in terms of those capabilities and potential and what could be possible for the team. So I wanted you to define this word authenticity for us and the way you define it, because I think it's a buzzword, and
Mm.
it's a very misunderstood word very often. And I think sometimes people feel like it gives them a license to just be a jerk because they say, I'm authentic in my approach, right?
Right.
At least I'm
Absolutely.
authentic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm
So
really
it's
this big of a jerk all the time and I'm bringing it into work. Right.
right,
It-
right.
yeah. Yeah. It's not, authenticity. Um, there is a question about the authenticity, and that question about authenticity is it working? Are you being so authentic that you're insufferable, that no one can stand to be around you, that, that you throw out propriety and that kind of thing?
Mm-hmm.
That's an authenticity that's it's not authenticity, it's
Mm-hmm.
selfishness is really what
Yeah.
that becomes. But authenticity has to look in the direction of service. In other words, I'm
Mm-hmm.
being as real as I can be to get real results. And if you want to know if you're being authentic, Don't look at yourself. Look at how your
Mm-hmm.
team's doing. Look at who's following you. Look at who's following your lead, and look at the leaders that you are creating. And if you're not doing that, then I've got some questions about your authenticity.
Mm-hmm. This is, I just want us to pause here because
Mm.
I think this is such an important thing to take in, that if we want to know how authentic or how effective we are as leaders, it's just enough to look at our team. And, if there are problems with how the team works, again, it takes a lot of courage, clearly, and vulnerability to honestly admit to ourselves and maybe even to others that, that's my responsibility. I have a huge contribution here, and I need to figure out what I'm going to do differently as a leader of this team to serve my people better and enable them to be successful.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Leadership is not about the leader. Leadership is about service, in my humble opinion. And the service that you provide to your team means that you have to look in the direction of what it is that you need, what it is that you need others to help you to create, to get clear on your vision, and then sharing that vision in a way that is all the things
Mm,
that we've talked about: open, vulnerable, clear, and communicated in a way that doesn't hype things up, that doesn't pitch.
mm-hmm,
I mean, look, leave the pitch behind. Tell the truth. Be
mm-hmm,
be real. Have a conversation and a dialogue where you show people that you can listen. And when people are heard and you take in other viewpoints, your own becomes stronger. It becomes more informed. I'm not suggesting that a great leader is the one who grants wishes or lets the inmates run the asylum. That's not what I'm saying. But listening to other points of view helps your own to become clear. And
mm-hmm.
my question is, if you think you are an effective leader, can you truly grant your employees and your team that feedback loop so that they
Mm-hmm.
offer you the feedback that you need to hear? And do you have the courage to listen when that
Yeah.
feedback comes your way?
Which is in itself another probably interview, how to create this environment where people feel safe to share their feedback, and how to solicit feedback in a way that enables people to be truthful with you. But just, in the limited time that we have
Mm.
together, would you have any advice, any tips for our listeners on how to get truthful, authentic, and useful feedback from your team on how you can serve them better as a leader?
It seems like this is really a question about how to listen effectively, right?
Yeah, I think to a
Mhm.
great extent, but also how to create, I suppose, safety. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I
Mm.
suppose that there's something about creating that psychological safety as well. Um, but probably it's part of. I'm guessing that you'll say it's part of effective listening, creating that environment where people feel safe with you and can feel like they can share real stuff, tough
Yeah.
stuff, without fearing what the consequences of that might be for them.
Right, right. And those consequences, yeah, you have to take the consequences out of the conversation if you want new ideas to flourish. And that can be really difficult. But here's an idea that can help point in that direction. Most of the time when we listen to people, we listen to affirm. In other words, listen to affirm what we already know, which is to say, oh, yes, I remember I read this in a book from Stephen Covey. Or listening to affirm is also, I know how this is going to end. I know what your answer is. I know what you need to do. So we're waiting for people to finish talking so that we can share our answers and affirm and confirm our conversational bias and our own expertise. But when we
Mm-hmm.
do that, we cut ourselves off from an important conversation. Listening to affirm is not the way to listen, not the way to create the culture of performance that we're talking about here today. Listening to discover is what needs to take place, and to entertain those discoveries without attachment to consequences or correction or critique is the key, in my opinion, to creating the kind of dialogue that's necessary, the feedback loop that people are hungry for. And if you look at the statistics, I mean, people don't leave organizations because the work is too difficult or the hours are too long. They leave organizations because they're not heard, listened to, and understood, and they don't feel that they have the support of their managers and leaders. And I've talked about this in articles on Forbes, and if I can share those links if you're interested. But the point is, without that feedback, without feeling that support that comes from a listening to discover, how does innovation flourish? The
Mm.
answer is it doesn't. You're just repeating a pattern. You are creating greater entrenchment in a culture that might not serve you. And
Yeah,
you're pointing in the direction of that's the way we've always done things
that's
versus
right. Yeah.
listening for something new. And that's what I think is so key. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. Yeah, absolutely. And so listening, I imagine, probably is part of creating strong connections.
Hmm.
And I'm wondering if you have any other tips or ideas to share with our listeners on how they can create strong connections with their teams and their bosses also, because I think that that's important as well. Um, Again, so that they can really maximize their chances of bringing whatever vision they have in mind and their team has in mind to bring it to life.
Within every organization, within every culture, there's one thing that always exists, and managers, leaders, and executives have to look in this direction, and it's the direction of misunderstandings about what the organization is capable of, misunderstandings about what individuals are capable of, misunderstandings about the action that really needs to be taken. And authenticity is really about creating an environment where people can look in that direction to discover what it is that they don't see. Because listen, we all have blind spots. I have blind spots. You have blind spots. Everybody listening has blind spots. And organizationally, when a bunch of folks with blind spots come together, that becomes part of the culture.
Mm.
And it is a scientific phenomenon. There are things that we don't see. And if you're wondering, how can we see the unseen? How can we create this environment that turns the idea that we'll never be able to do this? The problem is management. The problem is our culture. We've got to turn that idea on its head, which means
Mm-hmm.
it's time for new ideas, which means the real question is, where are those ideas coming from, and how are you turning to outside resources to help your internal resources to see things in a new way? Because how do you how do you gain a fresh perspective if you don't
Yeah.
invite one in?
Mm. So, can we talk a little bit, just a minute or so, about those
Mm.
outside resources? What could they be?
I think I think we're talking about folks like yourself and like me and others who you've had on this program, who bring new ideas as well as training as a coach, as well as insights from industry and that sort of thing, to
Mm-hmm.
help point people in a new direction, and not a direction that says, look, this is the way that I've always done it, so you need to do it this way too. That to me is a mistake. And there are a lot of leadership training programs out there, and culture coaches that are looking in the direction of a curriculum. In other words, here's
Oh
the course
God,
in
yes.
leadership.
Don't
Do
get
you
me
know what I mean?
started. Don't get me started on that. This is my pet peeve. Or
Me
maybe actually not.
too.
Yeah, I
Me
can't
too.
stand
Well,
it.
it goes back to what you were saying. You have to start where people are
Mm.
versus saying start at chapter one. And
And it's so funny that everyone still talks about, the recipe for the winning culture as if it's really existed. And if you only do the A, B, C, and D, you will have an amazing culture, and it's really going to work for you. And I'm like, yeah, right.
that's crazy.
It's,
That's not how it works. That's
yeah,
not how it works. I mean, we want it to work that way, right? I want to
it would
know
be
that if
so great.
I want to know that if I do what you did, I'll get the same result. But
Mm-hmm.
that's never how it works. I
Mm.
mean, the phrase that I use, that I share with people, is you can never enter a river at the same place twice.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
what I mean by that is, like, if I say enter the river right here, this is where I entered the river. Well, the river is different. When you
It's
go to enter the
flowing.
river, it's
Mm.
yeah.
Mm.
And
Absolutely.
isn't culture like a river? I mean, to sit there and say, "Well, this is how I entered the river, and this is what I did in 2007 or 2014." The only response to that is, "So what?"
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so fascinating because we arrive at similar conclusions coming from completely different angles. And this is what I found in my work. I've been doing a lot of research recently, just analyzing data that
Mm,
we've gathered over the years from our clients doing the so-called cultural assessments. And I was really trying hard to find my recipe for a winning culture as well. Honestly, I thought maybe there is something, and maybe I can come out and say, guys, we've figured it out. This is what you need to do. The successful organizations today do those 3 things or those 5 things. And there was absolutely nothing there except one thing, which was I noticed that organizations that are still in business after 20 years and are doing really well they have adaptive cultures, and basically adaptive cultures are cultures that are self-reflective.
mm,
So they'll ask themselves, is the way that we do things still serving us? What's
mm.
happening on the outside? What are the needs? What has changed? How do we need to evolve? How do we need to keep evolving all the time? That's it. It's as simple as that. Honestly, I can't see any other common element. And I think this is what you are saying as well, that you have to have these conversations, and it's a dialogue. It's not a recipe. It's not a prescription. It's a very dynamic conversation that needs to be happening all the time.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think the best coaches, consultants, and advisors are the ones who say, "Let me get in the kitchen with you.
Mm-hmm.
Let's create something
Yeah.
that is unique to you." Because if you can't do that, you'll only coach and consult people to the level of your own expertise. And
Mm-hmm.
that's something that I never want to do. And the results that I'm very grateful for the clients that I have and what they've been able to achieve. Their achievements are not a reflection of my expertise, except to say that my expertise, whatever the hell that is, points people towards their own expertise, points people towards the power that is inside of the individual and inside of the organization and the culture, and a willingness to look in that direction in an environment that's safe, in an environment that's authentic, is the only place to create exactly what you're talking about, this adaptable organization. And from that desire for adaptability
Mm.
is really where the conversation starts to change. And when you here's the thing, when you change the conversation, you change your results.
Of course. Yeah. It's really incredible how powerful conversations can be. I
Mm,
think we undervalue and underestimate the transformative power of having conversations with our teams and friends and colleagues and families generally as well, of course. Um, but yeah, that's what I've seen as well. That conversations can be transformative, and honestly, command and control doesn't work anymore, guys. So just stop trying to do it. I think it's never really worked, but especially nowadays, we cannot just tell people what to do and expect that they will just comply.
I couldn't agree with you more. And it's, we're not in the thick of the industrial revolution where we're all workers on an assembly line and I have to do the same thing as the person next to me. What I have to do is create, innovate, and find new ways to bring technology to life, to introduce products to market, to create customer relationships. I mean, whatever the case may be, whatever your career calls on you to do,
Mm.
you have to address that on an individual basis. You have to, as you said, start where you are and do what you can, not to match a pattern, but to discover how to, if I can, enter that river on your own terms,
Mm-hmm.
how to find your own recipe.
Yeah.
And the coach consultant that's really going to make a difference is not one that's going to share a curriculum, but one that's willing to walk in and say, what happens if we start at a blank page? Now, what
Mm.
are we going to create?
Yeah. I love that. I think it's a great moment to shift gears again
Mm,
and go to the section of the interview where I ask you 5 questions in rapid succession,
Okay.
and we'll aim to answer them in under 2 minutes. Are you up for it?
Okay. I'm
Awesome.
up for anything. Yes, of course.
Okay, let's go. So, how do you define organizational culture?
Organizational culture is a combination of individual personalities working towards a single goal.
And what is the sign, or perhaps signs, that a company culture needs some work, or perhaps even a major overhaul?
The first place to look is turnover, and turnover in the US context, meaning are people leaving the organization.
Hmm.
How are you doing attracting and retaining the people that can create your growth? Because if your culture is toxic or it's not healthy, people are going to leave, and that's what you'll see.
The best people will leave first,
Yes.
probably. What what company do you admire for their culture and why?
That's a tough question to ask because I work with so many companies that I really admire. I like the culture within Cisco very
Mhm.
much. They've created a culture of listening that I've featured in my books. I'm also an admirer of Salesforce, a terrific company based out of San Francisco.
Mhm. Are there any books on culture or on leadership apart from your books? And I definitely recommend them. And I'm going to post the links in the show notes. But what are the books that you've learned a lot about culture or leadership?
There's an interesting book. I'm looking here at my shelf so I can say, which one do I want to choose? A very interesting book called Stealing Fire
Mm.
that talks about how teams can work together, and they provide insight into how and I say they, it's a group of authors whose names escape me right now, but they talk about how the Navy SEALs, the US Navy SEALs, work as a cohesive unit, and
Mhm.
how they turn away from their thinking and their planning and really focus on being in the moment, and the strategies that they share for teamwork are very, very insightful. So, Stealing Fire, that's one.
Mhm. I'm going to check it out and I'm going to post the link to this book as well. So, what is one thing that our listeners can do today or tomorrow to start building their own culture lab and test some ideas that are going to help them to cultivate a culture that brings their vision to life?
If you want to get from point A to point B, in other words, where you are now in your culture to where you'd like your culture to be, remember that the shortest distance between 2 points is always a straight line. But rarely can organizations proceed in a straight line because things are complicated and culture is complex. But the the thing that I want to share is that the simplest message is the strongest, and to look in the direction of the simplest way to reach your goals without some of the assumptions, as we've talked about before, getting past the assumptions and the beliefs that look so real. What if they're not? What if there is a new way of looking at things in a straight line approach? And that's the first step towards getting from point A, where you are now, to B, where you'd like to be.
Mhm. I love that. And you've used this question quite a few times during our interview today. What if? And it's one of my favorite questions as well because it opens so many possibilities. I love this question and all the possible versions of the what if. Um, Thank you for that.
Mm.
So, finally, Chris, I always ask our guests to recommend an amazing guest, someone that you believe I should interview, and someone who you would like to listen to on the Culture Lab podcast.
One of my favorite interviews is a guy by the name of Todd DeWitt, Dewett,
Mhm.
Dr. Todd DeWitt. And he is the author of a book called Show Your Ink. He is an expert on authenticity. And he is also the most downloaded management expert on LinkedIn. And
Okay.
yes, he is the one that people turn to more than anyone on management strategies. And he received his doctorate from Texas A&M University. He's a recovering academic. He actually ran a business school in Ohio and has an incredible perspective on the workplace, on culture and authenticity. It might be an interesting exploration to take.
Mm, fantastic. Do you know him personally?
I do. Yes, I live in Houston, Texas, and Todd also lives in Houston, and we've had the opportunity to meet on a few occasions. And he's a speaker who I really respect, but I respect him not just for his style and his ability as a speaker, but because of his perspective
Hmm.
and what he would have to say on culture and creating uh, a culture of success and helping people to feel that they matter would be something that he could definitely have a few words to share.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for this recommendation. So, finally, I'm wondering if there's anything that you would like to leave our listeners with, any final words to leave our audience with.
Yes, if you feel like you have an obligation to pitch something, don't have a conversation. Don't think that it's up to you to try to speechify or find some magic words that are going to inspire your employees or even yourself. Take a fresh look at the conversations you need to have. And it's time to stop pitching and start connecting, because from that place of connection, that's where leadership really comes to life. When you're really able to listen, when you're really able to take in feedback, and you're not able to do that if you're focused on crafting some pitch. The most compelling and persuasive conversation you're ever going to have is always a dialogue. And based on what I read out there, I mean, I saw an article in the Harvard Business Review that says 69% of managers are uncomfortable talking to employees for any reason. If you want to
What?
change that, true story,
Really?
I'll,
Oh
I'll
my
give you
God.
the link. I'll give you the link. It's
Please.
startling.
Oh my God.
Hmm.
That's
But
terrifying.
I know. But here's I mean, I study statistics so I can defy them,
Mhm.
and I help my clients do the same. We're afraid of
Mhm.
conversations, and the thing that shows up for me is if you want to transform your culture, transform the conversations,
Mhm.
transform the communication and the way that you connect with the people that matter most. The people inside your organization, the customers you're trying to attract, the employees you're trying to hire. Your results depend on your willingness, your courage to have the conversations that matter. And that's how I define leadership language.
I love that. I can't think of a better way to wrap up our interview. Thank you so much, Chris. It was a wonderful conversation. And I'm sure that a lot of our listeners would like to check out your work, your books, and perhaps even get in touch with you. So, what are the best ways for them to reach out to you?
Well, if you're curious to learn more about me, my website is westfallonline.com. And Westfall Online is where you can find me on all social media. So on LinkedIn, Westfall Online, Twitter, Instagram, also Westfall Online. And there's another resource that I want to make sure everybody's aware of, and that is my YouTube channel. I have dozens of videos out there that talk about effective leadership communication, culture, and how you can make a greater impact in your career. And that's youtube.com/Westfall Online.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we'll post the links to your website and the YouTube channel and your profiles as well.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
I'm Aga Bajer, the creator and host of the Culture Lab podcast, and this is the Culture Lab team.
Production Manager, Lindsay Nunez.
Art Director, Emily Spencer.
Aaron Scott, Content Editor.
Sound Producer, James Eade, Be Heard.
If you haven't subscribed to the Culture Lab yet, you can do it on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and many other places where podcasts are available. If you'd like to subscribe to my newsletter, The Culture Lab Insider, go to www.agabayer.com/podcast and scroll down to the very bottom of the page. That's www.agabajer.com/podcast. Also, we would be ever so grateful if you could rate and review our podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to it. Before I give you the preview of the next episode, I just wanted to say thank you to Dave from Australia for his review on Apple Podcasts. Dave says, I'm so grateful I came across this podcast. It has given me new language, understanding, and appreciation for the role that culture plays in organizations. I now have several more books on my to-read list. Me too, Dave. And he says, thanks so much for creating it, Aga, a true godsend for my vocation and study. Oh, this is awesome, Dave. I'm so glad that you find the Culture Lab useful. And thank you so much for leaving this review. It really helps us to reach more listeners, people who can benefit from listening to Culture Lab. So if you haven't left a review on Apple Podcasts yet, please do. And we will be hugely grateful for that. And now a quick preview of our next episode. Soon you'll hear me speak to Ron Carucci. He's the co-founder and managing partner at Navaland. I first came across Ron's work through his articles at the Harvard Business Review. He works with CEOs and executives who pursue transformational change for their organizations. And he has a 30-year track record helping some of the world's most influential companies and executives to tackle challenges of strategy, culture, organization, and leadership. Here is a snippet from our interview where Ron talks about what we often get wrong when it comes to company values.
The values should be sacred. When you call them principles or values, there's an instant sense of them being sacrosanct. And if you're not going to treat them, so the creation of values is the beginning of the journey, but too often it's treated as the end of the journey. The creation, and who doesn't like it, right? It's inspiring. Everybody gets whipped up into a frenzy writing them, and then we put the plaques on the wall, and screensavers, and the T-shirts, and the mugs. We get all the accoutrement. We do all the training programs. Where the CEO comes out a video and talks about them, and all this, campaigning, and then we go back to life as usual. And that's where the work actually starts. But too often that's where it stops.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Culture Lab. If you found any moments that were interesting, inspiring, or maybe even game-changing, please share it with someone who'd appreciate it. After all, good ideas are meant to be shared.